You know, the public believes that scientists can't be wrong. Scientists know that scientists can be wrong, you know. And I questioned when this all started, is this one of these big finds like when we discovered that the Earth wasn't flat and it was round, you know, hundreds of years ago, or when Galileo and Copernicus put together that the Earth wasn't the center of our planetary system? Is this one of those big blunders that I've stumbled upon that the whole paradigm is going to have to shift because evolution doesn't work out, or do I just not understand it? Knowing this, that scientists can make blunders, I then pursued, I had the openness to pursue this because I tell you what, scientists have been wrong in the past about big things.
Prior to Charles Darwin, scientists had some rather strange ideas concerning how life began. They believed that living organisms came into being rapidly and spontaneously over a period of just a few weeks. The scientific community believed in spontaneous generation for 2,000 years. And it is a stark reminder that even a majority of scientists can be wrong. In his classic 17th century description of spontaneous generation, scientist Jan Baptist von Helmont suggested that mice came from dirty underwear.
Wanneer je een stuk gedragen...
Another evidence offered for spontaneous generation was the rotting meat experiment. 17th century scientists observed that if meat was placed in an open jar, maggots formed on the meat weeks later. They conjectured that life, in the form of maggots, arose spontaneously from rotting meat. But in 1668, Francesco Redi, an Italian physician and scientist, overturned this idea. He suggested this proof of spontaneous generation was nothing more than contamination of the meat by flies. When flies landed on the rotting meat, they laid their eggs. Over time, these eggs grew into maggots. Later, the maggots changed into flies. When scientist Redi prevented flies from landing on the meat with a piece of cheesecloth, maggots never formed. A third evidence for spontaneous generation was the 19th century pond water experiment. Scientists took pond water, boiled it, and poured it into an open jar. After a few weeks, the sterilized water was now teeming with bacteria. Soon the water became cloudy. Scientists suggested this was proof of spontaneous generation, that bacteria arose spontaneously from the sterile water. They scoffed at anyone who dared to question their conclusions. In 1859, spontaneous generation was finally rejected after the French Academy of Sciences held a contest to see if anyone could definitively prove or disprove the theory. Scientist Louis Pasteur stepped forward. Pasteur theorized that cloudy water did not represent spontaneous generation, rather contamination. He suggested that bacteria in the air seeded the water in the jar. To prove this, he sterilized water in an S-shaped glass. The opened end of the glass pointed upward and allowed air in, but bacteria could only settle in the neck and were prevented from reaching the water. After months of waiting, the liquid in the flask never became cloudy. With this experiment, Pasteur disproved spontaneous generation once and for all, and this first scientific natural explanation for the origin of life collapsed. Today, we can learn from the failures of the past. A scientific idea, theory, or law may be believed for thousands of years by a majority of scientists, only to be proven wrong. All scientific theories and laws should be open to scrutiny, even the theory of evolution.
It's not science unless you can question and falsify it. Unless you can say this is false, this is wrong, it's not science.
You know, scientists are just as much prone to holding on to old ideas as anyone else.
But there's always a chance with new evidence that we may find that there's a fundamental error in our thinking.
If you don't want to see things, you're not going to see them. And we're all guilty of not wanting to see certain things.
1,000 fossil bats have been collected. Now that's a lot of fossils, and these are beautiful fossils. Now if you would have that many fossils, and if evolution was true, you would expect to find ancestors of, let's say, a ground mammal changing into a bat. if you have 1,000 fossil bats. But the problem is there's not a single ancestor for any bat. The bats just appear suddenly, almost like it was a creation.
Almost like it was created.
Mm-hmm.
Bats are warm-blooded flying mammals. Some bats use sonar-like echolocation to catch their prey. An amazing 1,000 fossil bats have been collected so far. Many of these are complete bats. Some show breathtaking minute detail, such as wing membranes, fur, and even stomach contents. Despite this rich fossil record, Darwin's predicted intermediates have not been found. There are no fossils showing a ground mammal similar to a mouse, slowly changing into a flying mammal, a bat.
You would guess that there'd be some sort of a bat precursor, but once again, nothing. Bingo, they just show up. And so, I mean, as you might guess that, you know, there are certain people that think they were specially created. They actually are kind of a problem with the creationists who like to, you know, if things were created, here's a very highly complex mammal with all these adaptations, and bingo, they just show up at some particular moment in time fully formed as a bat. Obviously, we evolutionary biologists and paleontologists don't believe that, but at this point we don't have a good fossil ancestor for them.
Well, it's also, that must have happened also in the lowest tertiary, but we have no evidence for this evolution.
Now, bats aren't the only animal where we have a problem finding ancestors or transitional forms, isn't it? That's also true with fish.
Fish are yet another example. In fact, the whole fossil record is the same pattern. Let me tell you about fish. They have collected 500,000 fossil fish. 500,000.
That's an awful lot of fossils.
They've collected 100 million invertebrates, you know, animals without backbones, but they can't connect the invertebrates to fish. The fish just suddenly appear.
He reports that the fossil fish collections of the world are immense. Although fish have the most abundant fossil record of all the vertebrates, there are no fossils showing invertebrates, such as jellyfish or starfish, slowly changing into fish. Nor do the fossils show the formation of a spinal cord over time, as Darwin predicted. Despite a 150-year search for evolutionary ancestors, every fish family appears suddenly in the fossil record.
Every major kind of fish that we know anything about appears fully formed. There's not a trace of an ancestor for any of these creatures, and there are no transitional forms suggesting that these major kind of fishes evolved from a common ancestor. The fact that the vertebrates, the fishes, appear fully formed, no trace of ancestors, no trace of transitional form, destroys the theory of evolution. Evolution cannot be true.
Scientists who support evolution still hold out hope that they will eventually find these fossils.
The evolution of fish is still very much debated amongst paleontologists, and I think that within the next 10 years we'll probably get some resolution on the origin and interrelationships of the major groups of fishes. All we really know at the moment is that the bony fishes came from one of these primitive groups, but we don't really know which one. So there's still mystery and some debate over where the true bony fishes came from.
There just aren't any ancestral fossils. We've looked at bats and we've looked at fish. Are there other animal examples?
Yeah, we went and interviewed all of the seal evolution experts in the world, and we said, how many fossil seals have you found? 1,000 fossil seals have been collected. That's a lot of fossils. And then we said, could you show us the animals that evolved from what they think is a skunk, went into a seal? Can you show us these transitional fossils? And there are none.
Skunks become seals.
Seals are often mistaken for sea lions, but they are an entirely different family of mammals. Unlike sea lions, seals move on the ground like a caterpillar in an undulating pattern. Also, seals do not have visible ears. Evolution scientists believe seals evolved from the skunk and otter family.
Phosid seals are allied to a completely separate group of carnivores, the mustelids, the skunks and otters.
Over 5,000 fossil seals have been identified, but all of the predicted evolutionary ancestors are missing.
So the evolutionists aren't getting any help from the seals. There's no ancestors there either.
No ancestors for seals, no ancestors for bats, no ancestors for fish. It goes on and on and on.
And that, now, surely dinosaurs would be the saving proof here, because dinosaurs are so key to evolution, right? What about that? Is the opposite true?
You know, most people, when they go through a museum and see all these dinosaurs, they think, oh, this is proof of evolution. But I hold a different view. Are you aware that all of the major animal and plant groups have been found with dinosaurs? In other words, the fauna of the animals with the dinosaurs was similar to today. For example, they found ducks with dinosaurs, flamingos, avocets, hedgehogs, possums. All of the plant groups, all of the animal phyla have been found with dinosaurs. Now, number one, that's a fallacy that the faunas were different. And number two, they don't have ancestors for any of the dinosaur species. They have collected, Don, 100,000 fossil dinosaurs. 3,000 of them are full skeletons. And yet when we interviewed the scientists, they said we do not have a single ancestor for any of the dinosaur species. Nothing.
The idea of dinosaurs roaming our planet seems almost imaginary, but evidence of their existence is undeniable. Some of the plant-eating dinosaurs were over 90 feet long and weighed 30 tons. Meat-eating dinosaurs had huge serrated teeth and powerful jaws that could rip apart any foe. Paleontologists have recovered 3,000 dinosaur skeletons, plus bones and teeth from 100,000 dinosaurs. The remains are so voluminous they cannot all be displayed, many being relegated to museum basements. Despite this enormous collection of remains, no ancestors have been found for any dinosaur species, even Tyrannosaurus rex.
Wherever we try to put tyrannosaurs in the phylogeny of the branching history of theropod dinosaurs, they have a long missing record. And we're going to find that record one of these days.
We're certainly lacking information that ties together meat-eating dinosaurs and all the rest of the dinosaurs.
Even the plant-eating ornithischian dinosaurs have this same fossil pattern. A plethora of fossils, but no direct ancestors. Despite finding hundreds of skulls for the plant-eating dinosaur Triceratops, no direct evolutionary ancestors have been found.
Triceratops heads are just pretty common. I've heard tell that there are at least 50 different individuals just based on skulls alone, and that's probably complete skulls. And who knows how many partial skulls would increase that number. I suspect we probably know, 100 or hundreds of Triceratops from their skulls.
Many dinosaur evolution charts, such as this one from the Chicago Field Museum, imply that the ancestors of dinosaurs have been discovered. But when the solid lines are overlaid with the actual number of dinosaurs found, the chart tells a very different story. Opponents of evolution suggest these museum diagrams are often misleading and do not reflect the fossil evidence.
I thought it was correct.
Whales are magnificent creatures, capable of holding their breath for over an hour and diving to over 1,000 feet deep. But where did they come from? Scientists who support evolution suggest whales evolved from a land mammal. For them, the fossil evidence is so convincing, the evolution of whales is offered as one of the best fossil proofs for the theory of evolution. However, scientists who oppose evolution argue that this fossil evidence is unreliable. Darwin thought that whales might have evolved from bears. In The Origin of Species, he wrote, "In North America, the black bear was seen swimming for hours with widely open mouth, thus catching, like a whale, insects in the water. I can see no difficulty in a race of bears being rendered, by natural selection, more and more aquatic in their structure and habits, with larger and larger mouths, till a creature was produced as monstrous as a whale." Modern evolution scientists have abandoned Darwin's idea of a bear evolving into a whale.
So the modern evolutionists have abandoned Darwin's bear-whale theory.
Yes, they would say the evolution of a ground mammal to a whale is the best evidence they have. And I then decided to systematically look into this. And I got the evolution charts for how this evolution would occur. And I started asking questions. The first thing that struck me is, why does everybody have a different animal that evolved into whales? For example, the California Academy of Sciences says it was a hyena that became a whale. A different museum says it was a cougar-like animal that became a whale. Another one says it's a wolf-like mammal. Darwin says it was a bear. That seemed odd. Well, which one was it that became a whale? Then we started to decipher the charts and say, show us the fossils here for this animal. And we realized that the charts reflected something quite different from reality. The scientists actually had created the fins and the tail, the whale's tail, on the animal called Rhodocetus. And we were interviewing him on camera, and this revelation became known. It was stunning.
This is because when they go to a museum and they see these charts, they don't necessarily have to believe everything they read.
Don't believe anything unless you can see the fossils.
Scientists at the University of Michigan suggest whales evolved from this cat-like animal because of the similarities in the teeth, while scientists at the California Academy of Sciences believe this hyena-like animal evolved into a whale because its teeth are similar to some extinct whales. Biologists in Japan suggest whales evolved from a hippopotamus-like animal based on similarities in the DNA. Why can't evolution scientists agree upon which land mammal changed into a whale? There is great excitement in the scientific community over the discovery of a few important missing links between a land mammal and modern whales.
But what's good about these particular fossil whale specimens is that they do show us intermediates in the evolution of whales. We don't often get fossil intermediates, so we can actually trace the development of characters. Say, for example, the evolution of swimming in whales. We don't often have that opportunity.
As shown in this diagram from the University of Michigan Natural History Museum, Ambulocetus is one of the important transitional fossils in whale evolution. It is thought by some to be a walking whale.
Just in the last 5 or 10 years, we've had some remarkable discoveries of fossil whales. And in fact, there have been discoveries that have indicated that fossil whales had feet and actually walked on the land.
Frankly, I don't know why they could call that creature a whale. I have never seen a walking whale, and I've never seen a pig that flies. And they suggested some of these creatures were intermediate. Frankly, I just don't believe it. They believe that because they want to believe it.
Recently, some evolution scientists have backed off the assertion that Ambulocetus was an ancestor of modern whales because its eyes are high up on the head, like an alligator's eyes, quite dissimilar from whales and land mammals.
Ambulocetus may be on a slight sideline, and we think that mostly because it's very strange. It has its eyes raised up on top of its head in a very strange way, and it's unusually large for an early whale. But mostly the eyes up on the top of the head seems like an unusual specialization. Maybe it's not on the main line.
Evolution scientists claim the most spectacular intermediate fossil in whale evolution is Rhodocetus, an animal with 4 legs, a whale's tail called a fluke, and flippers. It would swim using its widened tail fluke like a modern whale, but it had 4 legs like a land mammal. A perfect transitional fossil between land mammals and aquatic mammals, just as Darwin predicted.
We have a complete modern whale-type structure in Rhodocetus. There are not many modifications from Rhodocetus to the modern whale other than changes in size of the structures.
When this video series was being filmed on location at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the executive producer noticed a discrepancy between museum drawings of Rhodocetus and the fossils. The reconstruction of Rhodocetus had a whale fluke, but there were no fossils of the tail to confirm this. Dr. Phil Gingrich, the scientist responsible for the discovery and reconstruction of Rhodocetus, was questioned how he knew there was a whale fluke on Rhodocetus, since that part of the fossil was missing.
What was the reasoning that the scientists think there was a fluke on Rhodocetus?
based on the other pieces of anatomy?
Well, I told you we don't have the tail in Rhodocetus, so we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebra indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke.
Scientist Gingrich also acknowledged that the flippers were drawn on the diagram without these fossils. Now, he does not believe this animal had flippers. Again, his answer was surprising, since the museum diagrams had flippers on Rhodocetus.
Now, since then, we've found the forelimbs, the hands, and the front arm, the arms, in other words, of Rhodocetus. And we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can be spread out like flippers are on a whale. And if you don't have flippers, I don't think you can have a fluke tail in really powered swimming. And so I now doubt that Rhodocetus would have had a fluke tail.
Many experts consider whales to be the best fossil evidence for evolution, but are unaware of these discrepancies. Opponents of evolution contend that whale evolution is nothing more than hopeful supposition. If museum diagrams are redrawn and corrected for various discrepancies, opponents argue that whale evolution is non-existent. Darwin suggested that the survival of the fittest, or natural selection, was another mechanism for evolution. He thought that nature would favor the strongest varieties within any species, and the weakest would eventually die off. The surviving varieties would improve over time, and eventually evolve into a completely new species. Some scientists argue that natural selection does not have the power or capacity to theoretically cause evolution. They contend that this process can only select or remove traits for a species, but not create new body parts. To better understand their argument against natural selection, one has to go no further than an animal breeder who uses the process called artificial selection. For instance, dogs have a limited number of genes or variations coded in its DNA, such as color, shape, or size. Using artificial selection, a breeder cannot go beyond these limits. Natural selection and artificial selection can only promote characteristics that are already present in an animal's gene pool, but cannot add completely new genes or body parts to any animal species. This new theory of evolution suggests that a carnivorous land mammal became a whale by accidental mutations.
In trying to understand the evolution of whales and dolphins from four-legged terrestrial carnivores, the first thing you have to keep in mind is that chance plays a tremendous role in this.
Scientists who oppose evolution suggest that changing one animal into another by accidental mutations is preposterous. If a carnivorous land mammal, such as a hyena, evolved into a whale, too many body transitions would have to occur by chance. The hyena's front legs would have to change into pectoral fins. Its back legs would have to disappear. Its nostrils would have to move to the top of its head and form a blowhole. The hyena would have to develop a dorsal fin by accident. Its bony tail would have to change into a cartilaginous fluke. Its body would have to increase to 80,000 pounds, and its external ears would have to disappear. Each of these new traits would require at least one new structural protein. Each protein would in turn necessitate adding 300 letters of DNA to the genetic blueprint in the proper sequence. This would be equivalent to a blindfolded toddler typing several pages of meaningful paragraphs into a completed book, or to a person throwing a die thousands of times in a row, and each time it came up as 3.
Some scientists are now questioning the theory of evolution.
Now, when you look at the gaps, it's incredible.
Yes.
And if this is the best they have to offer,
has to do with dinosaurs and birds. Now, when creationists think of dinosaurs and birds, we think of dinosaurs, we think of birds. But when an evolutionist thinks of dinosaurs and birds, it's dinosaurs evolving into birds.
yes. And you know, That's a difficult thing to explain. The more you know about biology, how that could possibly occur. How could a T-Rex evolve into a hummingbird? Something of that concept. It's hard to believe. Now, many people out there in the audience probably incorrectly believe that a dinosaur could make itself change, want to change, and want to learn how to fly. But those ideas that an animal could volitionally change or could adapt to the environment and then pass those changes to the next generation do not work. The only way a dinosaur could become a bird in the theory of evolution is by a series of accidents in the DNA in the reproductive cells. Yeah, Darwin was ignorant of DNA. He didn't know how animals changed, and he had these guesses that they could volitionally change. Right. But once we figured out DNA, and once we realized that DNA's code was fixed, once you're born, it's fixed, you can't change it, the theory of evolution ran into huge problems.
Charles Darwin suggested that an individual animal could adapt to the environment, but surprisingly, this concept is now considered outdated. For example, a lizard could not grow fur simply because of a sudden cooling of the climate. Even if a skin cell could grow a hair, there's no way for the skin cell to pass this information to the reproductive cells. The reproductive cells, such as the eggs, cannot get signals from the outside environment or signals from the body cells. Because of these difficulties, some biologists have suggested eliminating the concept of direct adaptation altogether.
Well, actually, of course, Lamarck and Darwin knew nothing about genes or genetics at all. It wasn't.
Darwin also thought that if an animal did not use a body part, such as a leg or an eye, its offspring would eventually be born without these. He envisioned animals shedding body parts this way through the law of disuse. But this idea is genetically impossible. Using or not using a body part has no effect on the DNA of the reproductive cells and cannot be passed on to the next generation. If you put an eye patch on a baby at birth and left it there till adulthood, that person's offspring would still be born with normal eyes. Disuse of a body part has no effect on the next generation.
A man by the name of August Weismann devised a simple experiment in which he kept cutting off the tails of mice, and he did this for 20-odd generations, and the mice still had tails.
With this simple experiment, the law of disuse was invalidated. Scientists continued to explore the law of use, and later realized that this concept was also genetically impossible. Any change to body cells has no effect on the DNA in the reproductive cells, and therefore cannot be passed on to the next generation. Unfortunately, much of the public believes the law of use and disuse is a valid idea, partly because scientists occasionally describe the mechanism for evolution in these terms.
You know, Don, Darwin got these false ideas about use and disuse from Lamarck, a scientist a century earlier, and he just went with it, and he wrote these ideas in The Origin of Species, but now we look at him and it's like, how foolish that a mole not using his eye would make his eye go away. It just doesn't work.
But we still hear on your tape scientists, modern scientists today, respected professors saying that somehow the DNA is affected by the stress of wanting to change.
It's not true.
But it simply has no scientific credibility.
And you read newspaper articles, science magazines, even textbooks, they still go with this incorrect idea of how this evolution could occur.
Well, now, modern scientists believe that dinosaurs evolved into birds, and many say that this is one of the best fossil proofs that we have for the theory of evolution.
You would have a dinosaur, and then you would have a bird. How could you make an intermediate? One way you could do that would be to starting to alter the fossils. You could take the dinosaur and start adding feathers to a dinosaur and putting it up in the museums, which they did. Or you could take a bird and try to make it look like a dinosaur and put scales onto a bird, which they did. And I'd like to show you this segment in the show because that's what's going on in the museums right now.
Evolution scientists believe birds evolved from dinosaurs. They refer to the oldest known fossil bird, Archaeopteryx, as a missing link because of its unique mix of both bird and dinosaur-like features.
Archaeopteryx is a classical example of a connecting links between two high systematic categories, namely the classes of birds and reptiles. Its skeleton is still dinosaur-like, whereas it had already fully developed feathers as the extant birds, and obviously it was capable of powered flight.
Opponents of evolution believe Archaeopteryx was simply a bird. Many museum models portray Archaeopteryx with a scaly dinosaur-like head. Dr. Peter Wellmhofer, one of the world's experts on the evolution of birds, believes these museum models are wrong because scales were not found on the fossils.
So we can reconstruct a model of Archaeopteryx based on the dimensions of the skeleton and based on the extent of the wing, of the feathers, of the wing and tail. We don't have a record of the body covering of the head, for example. So reconstructions are in most or in large parts are hypothetical and speculative.
The good professor talks a lot there about speculation. And we're putting scales where there maybe would have been feathers on the head of the bird. And now we're going to put feathers on the dinosaur to make the connection, and there isn't any proof for that either, right?
Oh, do you remember the movie Jurassic Park?
Yes, sir.
That's one of my favorite movies. The kids are being chased around the stainless steel kitchen, and those two dinosaurs, where the one breathes and fogs a window, that was a velociraptor dinosaur. Now, that's how I always thought of velociraptor, as being a scaly dinosaur. Do you know that scientists have put feathers onto that dinosaur? And you may ask, well, what evidence would they have for putting feathers onto that dinosaur?
None.
None, but we've done it, and we're going to display this at a museum in Australia. Let me show you this.
Some evolution scientists theorize that feathered dinosaurs existed in the past. In support of this belief, museums have added feathers to many common dinosaur models, such as this velociraptor exhibited at the Museum of Victoria in Australia. Opponents of evolution and even some evolution scientists have criticized this practice, since no feathers have been found with any dinosaur fossil. In an open letter to the National Geographic Society, Dr. Sturs Olsen, a Smithsonian Institute evolution scientist, has referred to the practice of adding feathers to dinosaurs as propaganda, hype, wishful thinking, melodramatic, nonsense, spurious, fantasia, and a hoax. He wrote, "The idea of feathered dinosaurs and the theropod origin of birds is being actively promulgated by a cadre of zealous scientists acting in concert with certain editors at Nature and National Geographic, who themselves have become outspoken and highly biased proselytizers of the faith. Truth and careful scientific weighing of evidence have been among the first casualties in their program, which is now fast becoming one of the grander scientific hoaxes of our age."
So we're putting scales on birds, we're putting feathers on dinosaurs, but with virtually no evidence, is that right?
No evidence in both those cases. And actually, it gets worse than this. You could say, how could it get worse than what you just described? Making up evidence, putting feathers on dinosaurs. And I would like to show you a story here. This is a scientist attaching a dinosaur tail to a bird's body and passing it off as a single fossil and making a flying dinosaur. This was reported in National Geographic, and they said this is one of the best evidences we have for bird evolution, birds evolving from dinosaurs, the flying dinosaur. You got to see this one.
This fossil, called Archaeoraptor, was purported to be an unusual missing link which would, once and for all, prove that birds evolved from dinosaurs. It had a long featherless tail, similar to dinosaurs, but it also had feathers and a bird-like body, giving the appearance of two different animals blended together, just as Darwin predicted. As Dr. Rowe carefully scanned the Chinese specimen and watched the cross-sectional images appear on the computer screen, he noticed something was very wrong. Dr. Rowe discovered that 26 fossil bones from 5 animals, including a dinosaur and a bird, had been fraudulently constructed to make a transitional fossil.
And that was the thing that caught our attention first. We could find no verifiable fit between that piece and any of the other parts of the block. And we found other irregularities as well. Even though it seems to fit tightly in here, when you look at it in cross-section, you can see that this piece and this piece have no verifiable association with the pieces around them.
This schematic diagram shows how many different fossils and rocks were used to create Archaeoraptor. 3 months after the original CAT scan was performed, National Geographic published its story about the discovery of Archaeoraptor. The article claimed that Archaeoraptor was a flying dinosaur, a missing link, and the best evidence that birds evolved from dinosaurs, but failed to reveal the serious discrepancies found by Dr. Rowe. Many well-accepted scientific theories concerning a multitude of subjects have been disproved. Some thought the Earth was flat. Some thought the Sun orbited the Earth. Some thought life came from non-living things through spontaneous generation. Some thought animals could change themselves through use and disuse and could pass these changes to the next generation. Scientists are just as prone to holding on to old ideas as anyone else. Knowing this list of historical scientific blunders, each perpetuated for more than 1,000 years, how many of us have scrutinized today's prevailing theory that humans evolved from a single-cell organism that mutated over millions of years? A theory is just that, a theory. We must always bear in mind that any scientific theory may be false and must be continuously subjected to testing.